Welcome to Divorced Muslims, A Second Chance, the podcast that uplifts voices for both divorced and single Muslims. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah amma ba'd rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to all our listeners, and welcome to another episode of Season 3 of Divorced Muslims podcast Second Chance. In today's episode, we are joined by Brother Mizan, who is a marriage counselor. For the first time in our podcast, we have somebody with that title. Brother Mizan, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to our podcast, and please do introduce yourself to our viewers.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me on your podcast, Muhammad. It's an honor, and I appreciate that you actually invited me onto the show. Before I say anything, I think you're doing a lot of good work here, raising awareness and giving hope to people. And I think that's very much needed within our community, especially in this day and age where divorce is on the rise and there are a lot of confused people when it comes to getting married, basically. So my name is Mizan Abu Isa, and I actually have a background in education, and I used to teach. I used to teach for a good 15 years, and then I left that years ago in order to pursue marriage counselling. And I also work for a Riva support organization where I'm the project manager at Islamwise. And so I do that as well as marriage counseling as well.
MashaAllah, so a lot going on there. So this leads me on to my very first question, actually. Tell us more about marriage counseling, marriage coaching, as one may put it. What is marriage counseling?
Essentially, it's facilitating a conversation and dialogue between two people who are having challenges within their relationship. And my role, what I do, is to facilitate that communication process so that they can learn to better understand each other and communicate effectively, learn what each other wants, and to improve the health of the relationship.
Okay. Is there qualifications that are required to be a marriage counselor? How does that work?
There are qualifications, and then there are accreditations, and then on top of all of that, there are UK requirements. Now, to become an actual counsellor in the UK, there are no legal requirements in terms of what types of qualification one does. There are accredited bodies out there. There are a number of different types of qualifications you can attain and, go and study, but there aren't any fixed rules or regulations per se. Hence why a lot of the times when I do my counseling on social media, you'll find that I call myself a marriage coach. And the reason why I do that is because most of my training has been Islamic psychology and counseling. And so my actual accreditation isn't the typical BACP, the Western style. So this is the reason why a lot of times when I present myself, I call myself a marriage coach. But in practice, I actually do marriage counseling. And I've been trained in solution-focused brief therapy. So that's a modality that I have been trained in. And I studied Islamic psychology and counseling. And that's the route that I decided to pursue. Now, there is a clinical route that people take that is often regulated a bit more strictly, and that's to do with mental health. I actually don't deal with mental health. I strictly stick to relationship therapy.
Okay. The reason I asked is, these days, when you look on social media, everybody's a life coach or a marriage coach or a relationship advisor. And that's why I asked that question. Okay, so when do people actually need marriage counseling or marriage coaching?
People need it when the relationship is really bad. So, every marriage has ups and downs, okay? There's no such thing as a perfect marriage. We all have problems in our marriages. But when you actually need therapy or coaching or counseling is when there's a consistent pattern of behavior whereby you cannot control yourself and your arguments are very bad to the point where you can't communicate effectively without stonewalling, without shouting, swearing, or even getting violent. If there's abuse involved, then that's an absolute deal breaker. But generally speaking, if you have issues which you can't resolve in a respectful manner between the two of you, that's when you should seek professional help.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess one of the important questions for yourself, given that this podcast is called Divorced Muslims a Second Chance, from your experiences and your opinions, what would you say are the main causes for divorce today?
The main causes of divorce, I think the main things that I have is that people have communication problems, intimacy. That's a very big one within that community. People don't want to talk about that. We can expand on that later, inshallah. Finances, in-laws, and abuse. These are what I would say are one of the top five reasons for divorces.
Would you say that's generally speaking or more towards the Muslim community?
I would say generally speaking,
Okay.
but the same is also reflected within the Muslim community.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. And how accessible, by the way, is marriage counselors in the UK? So for example, if somebody needed one, would they be easy to find?
Yeah, they're pretty much everywhere. You can Google marriage counselor, and you can pretty much find a whole lot of people who are in this profession. They are now all over social media, and so very very accessible, very easy to find. But I must say, a lot of people don't know the difference between a marriage counselor and a normal counselor who deals with mental health issues. They are not the same. So if you do need a marriage counselor or a marriage coach, then search up marriage coach, marriage counselor, or relationship coach or relationship counselor. Don't go for a generic psychotherapist or a generic counselor who's not really been trained in marriage and relationships because they've been trained in a different field. They will be able to help you, but their training is actually more to do with mental health.
Okay. Let's move on to some general questions. No doubt that generally speaking, British Muslims are finding it difficult to get married in 2026. It's been a problem for a while. There's no doubt a marriage crisis. Why do you think that's the case? What's the problem here?
People are finding it difficult to get married. Well, there's two ways. There's two ways of looking at this. On social media, it very much does seem like the case that people are finding it difficult to get married. But I think social media tends to, exaggerate things. And so sometimes when we find people talking on social media about the challenges of getting married, that's what we see all the time. And the algorithm tends to kind of favor that and kind of, shows that to everyone reading. So then people get this idea that people are finding it very difficult to get married. And saying that, well, people are getting married all the time. We do know that wedding halls are always busy. It's very difficult to book wedding halls, and so that shows actual proof that people are getting married on a regular basis, and there are weddings happening up and down the country. But in saying that, that's not to say that there aren't challenges. There are challenges, and a lot of the reasons why there are challenges is because people have unrealistic expectations of what it means to be married. They have unrealistic expectations of obtaining a spouse. So women have unrealistic expectations of what they want in a man, and men have unrealistic expectations in what they want in a woman. So these kind of things contribute towards some of the reasons why it's difficult to get married. In addition to that, people look in the wrong places. I have found by speaking to a number of people that people go looking in the wrong places to find a wife. So when I speak to some brothers, they may say, "Oh, there aren't any good women out there. It's difficult to get married." And then when I ask them, "Where did you look? Where have you looked?" And they will say things like they've been to the places that they socialize in, so they'll t-shirt cafes and bars or these types of places. And then I'll be like, why would you go there to find a wife? Obviously, if you go to those types of places, you are not going to find someone who's suitable to be wife material. Other places people go onto are certain websites and certain apps. I won't name any, but usually those types of apps or websites where the wali is not involved and there's a direct contact between the guy and the girl, and there are no families involved, and so then these people meet up and they tend to have around relationships, and as a result of that, you know, people don't get married. They just meet up, they do their thing, and then afterwards things fall apart.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think are the key elements of a healthy marriage?
Some of the key components within a healthy marriage, I would say, communication, having the ability to speak to each other in a respectful manner, being open to speaking to one another. So communication is very key. It's essential. Having mercy, being compassionate and merciful towards one another. Without compassion and mercy, then people find it difficult to overlook mistakes. And the third thing I would say is the ability to smile and laugh with one another. If you can't smile and laugh with your spouse, then what kind of a relationship do you actually have? And the fourth one which is very important, which I think a lot of people don't really talk about, but they do think it, is intimacy. And when I say intimacy, I'm talking about both types of intimacy, which is sexual and non-sexual.
Okay. Some of the things that you mentioned there, leaving the intimacy bit out a second, like ability to smile, communication, do you reckon people should be looking for that? How would you identify those things when you're in the marriage search?
Well, you wouldn't necessarily go looking for those things. So what I would say is you should look for what is compatible to you. So a guy and a girl, when they go to get married, they should look at compatibility factors. When the compatibility factors align, then they will get along. If they get along, then they will communicate effectively. They will have a laugh and a joke. They will have more compassion and mercy towards each other. And when these three are in line, the fourth one, intimacy, will automatically fall into line. So compatibility factor is far more important than those other things. So compatibility factors, just elaborate on that a little bit, will include things like character. It will also include things like your culture, your language, your religion, your level of religiosity, your socioeconomic background, your education. All of these things are compatibility factors.
Okay. Focusing on your line of work, what are some practical strategies for a conflict resolution in a marriage?
One of the things that I try to encourage couples to do is that before they sit down to speak, okay, this is a task, this is an actual task that I give to couples. And if they can master this, they don't need therapy, they don't need counseling if they can master this, inshallah. Okay. First, you set some ground rules in terms of how you're setting the context before you sit down to speak about your problems. So make sure that you have both eaten, that you're not hungry, that you're not thirsty, that you're not tired. Make sure that you have minimum 2 hours or 3 hours at hand without any disruptions or distractions. Put your phone away, turn your phone off, make sure the TV is turned off. If you have children, make sure your children are not around. So set the scene before you sit down to speak. It's very important. Once you set the scene, then you are now in the right frame of mind to sit down and engage in a conversation. Now, before you speak, set some rules. So you would agree to talk about the problem at hand. You would agree not to shout, not to swear, not to insult. And if you find that you are feeling a little bit emotional or a little bit overwhelmed, or your tone has, gone up, then you'll pause and you'll move away for a few minutes and then come back again. If you can't, then agree to come back another day to continue from where you've left yourself from. So once you've set the tone, once you set the rule, then sit down and then talk about your problems. If you have 3 or 4 problems, just talk about the one issue. The other 3 or 4 can wait for another day, because if you talk about 3 or 4 problems in one go, you are not going to resolve anything, and it's just going to end in chaos. So narrow it down to one thing, the most important out of those few issues, and then talk about the problem itself.
Next question: how can faith be incorporated into counseling without judgment?
Interesting question. A lot of people tend to use religion as a weapon when it shouldn't be. Okay, the deen isn't there to be used as a weapon. The deen is there as a mercy and as the guidance for us, right? And so when people sit down and they use the religion as a weapon, that's when it becomes problematic.
So what I was trying to ask is, how can Islam be incorporated into the counseling aspect without judgment coming into it? Some people maybe feel that they're being judged upon when the religion is part of the advice or kind of the therapy or counseling session. How can it be executed without that kind of person feeling judged?
Okay. I'm guessing this question is coming from perhaps people who you have spoken to, who went to seek counseling with an imam, and perhaps they felt like religion was used to judge them. Is that the background and the context of
Yes,
this?
so it's exactly that, and also when certain brothers and sisters who I've come across, what they say is, we prefer going to a counselor who isn't Muslim. So I'm like, wait,
Mhm.
okay, that's fair enough. Without sounding racist or anything like that, why would you not go to an Islamic based counselor? And
Mhm.
usually that's a response that I get. Oh no, I don't want to be judged. Maybe in fact, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but then they go into detail and they talk about their own deen. So it's almost as if like they're accepting that, maybe they lack certain areas in the deen. Allah knows best, but they don't want to talk about the deen when it comes to counseling because they might feel judged. That's the impression I've got. Does that make sense?
I understand. I fully understand. This is why I want to clarification because I have seen the same as well. So the reason why this happens is because, with all due respect to our imams and sincere knowledge, look, the honorable people, they went to learn about the of Allah. They are honorable people, okay? But they are not trained in counseling and they're not trained in marriage and relationships. Yes, from an Islamic fiqh point of view, they understand rules and regulations from a religious point of view. They know the halal, they know the haram, they know the rights and responsibilities from an Islamic point of view. Yes, they know all of that. But often when couples go to see imams and to seek counseling, and I'm saying counseling quotation marks now, okay, they are not actually getting counseling where conflict resolution is at play. They are not speaking to someone who's going to try to understand the root causes and then find effective ways using strategy in actually mitigating those problems and then finding solutions. They don't actually take that approach. They will just give black and white answers usually. Not all of them. Some of them are trained, mashallah, but generally speaking, they will just give black and white answers about what is halal, what is haram, and what is the right of a man and what is the right of a woman. And they don't take into account feelings much. And as a result of that, often women feel like as if they've not been heard. A lot of times it's women who complain about this. They will feel that they've not been heard. Everything seems very transactional. Everything seems very black and white. And so they feel like as if um, men only understand men when it comes to the imams and taking the husband's side, and women's voices are just not being heard. So this is what usually tends to happen, and it's happening because they are not trained. That's the main reason why. So I would always say if you need support, if you need some type of intervention, then go to a professional who has been trained in counseling and do your sessions with them. Don't go to the masjid straight away. Don't go to the imam straight away. Usually, when people go to the masjid is when they're ready to check out. When they are about to divorce, that's when they go to the mosque. And so the imams are not trained, and number one. And number two, couples are going to the wrong people.
Okay. And going more deeper into your line of work now, right? I'd like to think it's fair to say when people do book an appointment with yourself, um, there's some problems in the marriage, right? So my question is, from your perspective, what are the key red flags indicating that a marriage is in real danger?
The obvious one is abuse, okay? But if there's no abuse involved, then some of the major issues would be when there's an absolute communication breakdown. So that would look like when couples can't talk to one another without arguing, fighting, screaming, shouting, stonewalling. And so that's one major issue. Another issue would be when there's a feeling of disgust for one another. So they will mock each other. There'll be cruel sarcasm towards one another. That usually means that the rahmah within them has gone with the other person. And another one would be if there's a problem with intimacy. So these three, I would say, are the major, like, warning signs, if you like, that the marriage is in real danger.
Okay. Now, the other theme that I wanted to discuss with you was essentially trauma. Now, I appreciate that, the mental health aspect is outside of your remit per se, as you mentioned earlier on. But I thought I'd still ask you this question based on your experiences. How does one overcome trauma from a previous marriage? And I'm specifically asking on behalf of people who are divorced. Often what happens is they get divorced, and of course, that has an impact on them. And they want to one day be looking for marriage, inshallah, in the future. But the question that they have, or the problem they have, is that they're in that middle kind of zone where they want to look for marriage, but that previous marriage that trauma is still there. So, from your point of view, how does one overcome that trauma from a previous marriage?
Mhm. That's actually a very good question. It's very important before a person moves on from a divorce, before they move on, that they heal. If they don't heal, then they will enter another marriage with a lot of problems, and it will most likely cause another divorce. So how do you heal? Forgiveness. So try to forgive the other person. Accountability. Take ownership for the mistakes that you have made. And that's the starting process, really, these two things. Once these two things are in motion, then you can start to let go of the person, let go of the harm that they've done to you. You can let go of the anger and the hate that's within inside you, that's holding you back onto the past life, past relationship. and then you can start moving forward in a much more healthier way. And in order to do that as well, you should try to build yourself up. So people often suggest you take up some type of hobby, work on your fitness, work on well-being, anything that promotes well-being really. So take on those things because if you will freshen up your mind, it will enable you to grow and heal and then move forward. Those are the main kind of things that one should do. Now, these are very easy for me to just say out, okay? But you'll be surprised a lot of people do not do these things. This is the reason why a lot of divorced individuals, usually sisters, not always sisters, it can be brothers too, but usually sisters struggle with this a lot more. Perhaps because the impact of divorce on a sister is far greater and more harsher on a sister than it is on brothers. Because often you find that sisters, when they get a divorce, if they have never worked or they solely relied on financial income from the husband, and all of a sudden the divorce, they don't have any money, they're struggling financially, they have children, and often you'll find that men sometimes don't involve themselves with the children as much. So then the women are then left with the kids to deal with, as well as their own personal stress and trauma and the trials that they're going through. Stigma from the community, stigma from even family members. So for sisters, it's a bit more challenging, it's a bit more difficult. Um, but in order to heal, those are the types of things that one needs to do, really.
You know, I'm going to draw some parallels here because earlier on you mentioned that there's a lot of, unfortunately, we are in a position where people are engaging in unlawful relationships, right?
Mm.
Those individuals who are part of that eventually end up looking for marriage. So, although my question was about trauma or unhealed trauma in relation to a previous marriage, which of course is halal, do you reckon there are scenarios where, unfortunately, that trauma or unhealed trauma also applies to the situation where people have been involved in unlawful relationships and there's been some kind of heartbreak, it hasn't worked out, and they're also undergoing that trauma and they're also putting themselves in the marriage search? Can you draw a parallel between the two?
Yeah, 100%. There is, because at the end of the day, it's still a relationship. Person A and person B have been involved together and they've been intimate with one another. They've been affectionate with one another. They have shared a lot with one another. And so, even though they may not have been married, but they have committed themselves to this other person. And especially if they've had a long-term relationship, then when a breakup happens, they need to learn how to heal from that and move forward. So, yeah, it's pretty much similar.
I guess for the viewers, although I'm not a student of knowledge or a scholar, one thing I would add to Brother Mizan's advice there, in addition to what he already said in terms of the ones that are overcoming the previous marriage, is, of course, when you're in an unlawful relationship, one should be conducting tawbah and repentance as well. But remember, you don't need to do tawbah and repentance for being in a marriage. That's halal, and I guess that is a massive difference between the two.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, so you've mentioned this a few times. You've said the word abuse, which obviously indicates that you've come across scenarios where in marriage there's essentially a perpetrator, a person who, let's just call them somebody who's abusing their partner. This could be physical, emotional, mental, sexual, etc.
Mhm.
So, with that in mind, of course, you're trying to save the marriage, right? You're trying to help this couple out as part of your marriage counseling. Um, in my opinion, it's a very tough question. Is it possible for a perpetrator to change their ways? Or is it a simple case of once a perpetrator, always a perpetrator, once an abuser, always an abuser?
The short answer is yes, people can change. 100% people can change. I'll give you some examples. We all know that story, the famous story, that famous hadith that talks about the man who killed 99 people. This man went on a journey of seeking forgiveness, seeking Allah, and as a result of that, Allah forgave him. Okay, change is possible. Look, another example. We have people who are non-Muslims and they are Muslims, so they converted into Islam. That's change. We have people who are non-practicing Muslims, and then they become very practicing Muslims. That's change. So is change possible? 100%. It comes down to the individual, really. Do they want change? And how badly do they want change? That's what it comes down to. So in the context of marriage, let's just say there's a man who's very foul-mouthed, he's very aggressive. Maybe he's beating up his wife. Can he change? It is possible, but in abuse cases, usually they say it's very difficult for a man to change, though it is possible. But if we take it down a notch a little bit, let's just say the man is not physically abusive. Let's just say he's just got certain bad traits within him. Maybe he swears. Maybe he finds it difficult to be romantic. Maybe he finds it difficult to talk to his wife and to be open to his wife, and vice versa. The women can be like this as well. Can they change? Absolutely, they can change. It takes education and training and the willingness to want to change.
Okay. Um, I'm going to probe you a bit further on this, right? Let's talk about that physical abuser. That kind of an individual, can they change? And the reason I'm asking this is because there could be brothers or even sisters out there who have openly accepted that in their previous marriage, the cause for the divorce was them. They admit it, they confess that we made a mistake or mistakes and we did, physically abuse our spouse. We regret it. Obviously, the divorce has happened. They still want to marry again. At the same time, a lot of these brothers and sisters are quite open and honest, where they get asked the question when they're looking for marriage again. They get asked the question, "What went wrong in the previous marriage?" And they say, "Yeah, the reason it went wrong is because I was physically abusive." With that kind of an individual, is it possible for them to change and mend their ways?
Well, there should be a follow-up question to what you just asked there. So, if in a situation where someone is asked, why did your marriage end? And the person said, yes, it was because of me. I was abusive. I hit my wife, etc. Then the follow-up should be, how have you changed from that? What have you done to not do that again? So that follow-up question is very important. If you find that the person, let's just say the person said, "Oh, I used to be an alcoholic. I used to take drugs, and I wasn't really practicing, and as a result of those things, I was very aggressive when I didn't want to come home, and then I used to hit my wife, etc., etc." Now, since then, it's been 3 years. I don't drink anymore. I don't take drugs anymore. I'm very clean. I'm practicing Muslim now. I'm very calm now. You can see he has actually changed now. Okay. So it's very important to ask that question, like, what have you done in order for you to change? And a lot of the times you'd find people don't put in the work to change. So this happens in this situation which we're talking about, as well as situations where people have divorced and they're trying to move on. You'd often find that people don't really put in the work to really change. And as a result of that, they struggle to get married again. Now, I do want to add one extra thing, inshallah. I mentioned the five main causes of divorce, yeah, and the fifth one being abuse. Okay, I don't actually deal with abuse cases. The reason being is they're very messy, they're very complicated, and you have to report them. So if I want to avoid all of those things, so hence why I actually don't deal with abuse cases. I deal with people with communication problems, intimacy problems, in-laws, finance issues, etc. I deal with all of those things when it comes to marriage and relationship problems. But abuse is something that I don't deal with or touch.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Um, okay, so what advice would you give someone who wants to prepare for marriage but feels unsure where to start?
First things first is understand who you are, your identity, your values. Okay. Once you understand your identity and your values, then you'll know who you are, and then you'll know who to look for really. A lot of times people don't really know who they are, they don't really know their values. Your values are shaped by your education, Islamic education, non-Islamic education, your culture and your upbringing. Okay, these are what shapes your actual values, and this will actually give you standards as well. So then you know who you are, and then what you should look for. So do these things first, as well as learn about, from the standpoint of view, learn about the rights and responsibilities of a husband and a wife. If you're a man, you should learn both, and if you're a woman, you should learn both as well. Don't just say, "Oh, I'm a man, so I'm only going to learn a fixed side of what it takes to be a husband, and the woman only learning by the woman's side." No, you should learn both sides. Okay, so equip yourself with that knowledge, and that's the foundation really.
Okay, you mentioned standards, and that is actually related to my next question. What is the difference between having standards and having unrealistic expectations?
So standards come from your values. Okay, so as I just mentioned, your education, Islamic and non-Islamic education, your upbringing, etc. Those values will make your standards. Unrealistic expectations are when you look beyond your standards, when you try to attain something that's out of your reach. So let's talk about this. What this means in practical terms, shall we? So standards. So let's just say, for example, there's an individual and they are, let's say they're very practicing. They pray 5 times a day. The brother goes to the masjid. He makes an effort to pray in the masjid in Jama'ah. Let's say he's actively learning about the religion, and he works. He works. Let's just say he works in a supermarket. Okay, and he's very family orientated. He looks after his parents, etc. Okay, so he comes from a particular. You can see his life, what it is, and who he is. Okay, based on that, he should then look for a spouse that is quite similar to who he is and to his background. If he looks for someone that's outside of that, you know, his type of background, then there will be issues. So, for example, let's just say his standards are not that he's a practicing individual. Would it now make sense for him to marry or look for a person who is not practicing, or a sister who prays maybe 3 or 4 times a day, doesn't really pray 5 times a day, or a sister who doesn't really wear hijab when he's really practicing and she's not? So this is where compatibility comes in as well. I talk quite a lot about compatibility because I really truly believe that compatibility is what it really takes to align people together in order to make the foundations for a successful marriage, inshallah. Um, People skip the compatibility part. A lot of the times people just go for looks and surface level values, and then they just decide to rush into marrying someone. And so then, so they have issues. And I'm digressing kind of away from the question now a little bit, but coming back to that question, unrealistic expectations. Look, unrealistic expectations. I blame social media for that. People see things on social media. They see certain influences on social media, men and women, and these men and women are giving a very bad advice to the younger generation of what to expect in a marriage, what to expect in a spouse. And people are falling for these things. Yes, you have these compatibility issues, and then also you have these unrealistic expectations that people have given themselves, and it's causing problems.
Okay, so let's talk about apps. I would say that it's probably the most utilized method to find a spouse in the UK. I don't have any source to back that statement up, but that's my opinion.
Okay.
Um, and my question is, have apps improved or damaged the marriage search? Essentially, what we have is the question of, are people genuinely serious who are on these apps, or are they emotionally browsing? What's your thoughts around this?
Most apps are, you know, terrible. Most marriage websites are absolutely terrible. They are essentially a place of dating, in all honesty. And the reason why I say that is because most of these have been designed to connect the guy and the girl without the one. And so it gives scope and it gives room for fitna to happen, and it does happen. And that's why you get a lot of people. They jump onto these apps where there's no wali involved. There's no filter. There's no safeguarding for the sister. And then all of a sudden they have haram relationships. And then if you have a haram relationship, how do you expect blessings from Allah to come into that relationship? If you do haram, you can't expect blessings from Allah, can you? It's the opposite of what's supposed to be tayyib and good, right? So, in my opinion, you know, I'm not saying all apps and websites, but a lot of apps and websites are problematic.
Okay. Let's talk about parents and family and parental and family involvement. When they're involved in a marriage search, where do you draw the line between advice and control? When is it controlling and when is it advising when family are involved in the marriage search? Or even, you can even take that to when family are involved in when marriages are not working out. So I guess there's kind of two parts to that question.
Okay. From Islamic perspective, it's very important that we involve our family members, our parents, our elders, okay? Especially for the sister, but also for the brother as well. And usually from our types of cultures, when you marry, you don't just marry the girl, or the girl doesn't just marry the guy. You actually marry to a whole ecosystem. An entire family is what you marry into, okay? So it's very important from the very get-go that we do involve family members, okay? And especially when you do things the Islamic way, you're meeting someone for the first time essentially. How are you going to check for compatibility? How are you going to know that this person is good for you or not? This is where family comes in, and they do their due diligence as well as you as well. And then they assess whether this person is going to be good for you or not. So it's important that we do involve family members and take their advice and take their guidance. and learn from the experience, etc. Now, when does it become controlling? It becomes controlling when, I suppose, when it's forceful. So if a guy and a girl, their parents force them to get married, that's when it becomes controlling. When they lose their rights in saying, no, I'm not attracted to this person. I don't want to marry this person. And then their parents, rebuke them for that. That's when it becomes controlling. Emotional blackmail. Sometimes some parents do that, unfortunately. Um, they say if you don't marry if you don't marry this person, then we're going to lose face. You're going to bring shame to the family. I promised them that you were going to marry them, etc., etc. So those types of things are when it becomes, controlling and it oversets them.
Okay. My next question is about essentially delaying disclosure of a vital piece of information. And the backdrop of that is that often a divorced person finds that once their status is known, i.e., once it's known that they are divorced, interest in them drops sharply, obviously, when they're looking for marriage. So, what they do is they consider delaying disclosure of the fact that they have previously been married just to be seen as a person first. There's this balancing exercise of honesty and the self protection to get married. What's your thoughts around this?
That is a tough one because I can understand uh, when a person is divorced and then they try to get married and then realize they're getting rejected because they're divorced. Okay, and that's very hurtful. That's a tough thing for someone to go through. Okay, Um, but I would say honesty is very important in this because otherwise it could be seen that you're misleading the other person, and you don't want to do that. Okay, just be open and honest from the get go. Usually, people have marriage profiles, right? And on the marriage CV, they'll say their marital status, single, divorce. Okay. Now, if a person chooses you and it says divorce on there, then alhamdulillah, this person is actually choosing you for your intrinsic qualities. I understand it's difficult because within our society and community, most people have a mark on their heads, unfortunately. It shouldn't be the case. It's not from our deen to act and behave in that particular manner towards divorced people. But the reality is that is the society that we live in. And unfortunately, divorced people find it more difficult to get married. I would say you still need to be honest, be true to yourself and be honest and just make dua to Allah. And ultimately, Allah is the one who will determine, who you get married to, inshallah.
Okay. Let's talk about fear-based marriages. Is fear a valid reason to marry? So, for example, one may argue that options get worse after 30. So, I guess a person is in a situation where they're fearful of growing older and their pool of potential is decreasing. But at the same time, they may have certain standards. But the question here is fear a valid reason to marry?
You shouldn't, okay? You shouldn't marry just purely out of fear, okay? But I do understand why people may want to do that. Especially when people, like 30 seems to be, the big deal number. When people start to age towards 30, they start stressing out. Oh no, I'm not married. What should I do? Would anyone want me? Am I going to have kids? What are my family going to say? And so the fear is very real. It is very much real. And it kind of puts a lot of stress and strain on the individual. It kind of rushes them. And when they are rushed, then they can often make a lot of mistakes. They may avoid or not see red flags. Try to be calm when you go through the marriage process. Don't delay marriage. A lot of the times, people actually delay marriages. Not always, but in many cases, people delay marriages and they say, "Oh no, I'll get married later. I want to focus on my education. I want to focus on my career. I want to focus on business, etc., etc." And they don't realize when you do go to get married, sometimes it can take several months to a couple of years just to find the right person to get married to. So if someone's delaying getting married and say, "Oh, I'll look when I'm in my late 20s." Let's just say they hit 28, and then they go looking to get married, and then it takes them about 2 3 years. They're hitting 30, so they will get stressed out. So I would advise people to not put off or delay getting married. Start looking, at an earlier stage, so then you don't need to get stressed out when you do get towards 30. Okay.
Okay. So, next question. Why is a man who is divorced often seen as experienced, but a divorced woman is seen as baggage.
That's just how society is. And I'm not just talking about the Muslim community, it's also the non-Muslim community as well. Often you find people just criticizing, oh, why are Muslims like this? I'm talking about, Muslims criticizing other Muslims, okay? But the unfortunate reality is men can brag, oh, yeah, I've got experience. It doesn't go the same way when it's the other way around. But look, it's not a flex, to say I've been married and divorced or I've had, around relationships, so I'm, quote unquote, experienced, okay? It's not a flex, okay? And we shouldn't present it like that. Um, People who do present it like that, it kind of shows their mindset and it shows the type of values that they adhere to. And if that doesn't align with your values, then avoid people like that.
Okay. Um, Talking of marriage as a whole, is marriage seen today as a means of growth or social validation?
I can see in some communities or in some sections of society how it can be, seen as growth or social validation. It shouldn't be, but I can see how it can be. Like, for example, you might find someone who is in a poor country, comes from a poor country, and then they marry someone in a uh, you know from the UK, for example. So for them, it's seen as growth as well as social validation. To them, where they're from, quote unquote, they've made it in life now. So, depending, I suppose, in the context, people can see as growth or social validation. I suppose I can take it into another direction and even say there are certain people from the BAME community who may have an inferiority complex. And if they marry someone who is white, then they may feel like they have, achieved a lot in society. So there are people like that. But I mean, marriage shouldn't be for those reasons. That's not what marriage is about. Marriage for us as Muslims is ultimately connecting with someone who will take us to Allah and the Akhirah. Okay, so we're in this journey in the dunya together, and we are here to help one another to better one another in order to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's from an Islamic perspective. That's what marriage is for us being Muslims.
Okay. Green flags are more important than red flags. Agree or disagree?
Definitely, but that doesn't mean if somebody has six green flags and two red flags, you marry them. Red flags are absolute no-goes. Okay, so green flags are definitely important, but you shouldn't really accept red flags.
Okay. Are British Muslims emotionally unavailable but spiritually articulate? What do you think?
When you say British Muslim, are you referring to the practicing British Muslims or just general British Muslims?
So generally speaking.
Well, generally speaking, from what I've seen, the general masses, they're not very articulate in the deen. They don't really know much about the rights and responsibilities of husband and wife. They know some stuff, some things they may have picked up by watching a couple of lectures. But for the practicing community, yeah, I very much do agree with that statement that you made. Religiously, they're quite articulate. They've memorized a lot of Quran and Hadith, and they can just throw ayat and Hadith at you with evidences. But when it comes to actual practical life, building a relationship with a spouse, they have zero understanding. They are emotionally bankrupt in a lot of cases. So, I've seen that. I'm just talking from what I have seen over the years. So let me give you an example. So often I will find practicing couples, like very religiously practicing couples, and they'll come to a session and, the guy will say, the brother will say, he will say, oh, I'm giving her up, meaning that he slept with her. Okay. So I don't understand why she's ungrateful. Okay. But then when I turn and ask the sister, you would find a complete different story. You'll find that she feels emotionally disengaged from her husband that because he's not affectionate or romantic towards her. So there's a mismatch here. Okay. When people apply the deen in a very black and white manner, okay, without understanding feelings and emotions, then you get a mess. And I do tend to see that a lot within our communities. People applying the religion in a very black and white manner, saying, oh, I've given her a hug, everything should be okay. Or there might be a submissive sister who doesn't really argue much. Internally, she's not really happy because, lack of affection, romance within the relationship. And so, yeah, there is an actual problem there.
Okay. And finally, what do you think the solutions are to the problems of the difficulties in finding a spouse?
Well, I suppose part of it goes down to knowing yourself first, your identity, your values, do pre-marriage coaching, counselling, understand from a religious point of view the rights and responsibilities of a husband and wife. So cement those things first, okay? And then go looking for a spouse in the right places. So don't go to the shisha bar. You're not going to find your spouse in the shisha bar. I know it may sound like a joke, but this is not a joke. A lot of people actually do that. Hence why I mentioned it. Don't go on to some of these very questionable apps that are known for, promiscuous people appearing on there. So avoid those kind of places. So go to the right channels, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So work on yourself, know who you are, pretty much counseling, understand from a deep perspective what it takes to be a husband and a wife, and then take the right channels. And most of all, have reliance on Allah and continue to make dua.
Okay. Jazakumullah khair for that.
Barakallahu.
We're gonna play a game, and I know you don't know anything about this game. Just letting the viewers know, this is a surprise game that I play with all the guests in this season, and it's called Red Light, Green Light. And I appreciate you're not looking for marriage, but this is in the in the scenario if you were looking for marriage. I'm going to give you a few scenarios, and you're going to tell me whether you're giving the red light to that person, the green light. You got the choice of amber light as well. Okay, you ready for this?
Okay.
All right. A sister who can't cook.
Red light.
A sister on the deen but has a previous criminal conviction.
What's the conviction on?
I mean, that's a generic question, so I can't go into details. That's it.
Amber.
Okay. A sister with a social media page with many opposite gender followers.
Red light.
A sister that doesn't talk to her family and essentially lives independently.
Red light.
A sister who has had a bad past but is a good person today.
What's the time gap between the bad past and the good?
Let's say 5 years.
Okay, green light.
A sister who has suffered abuse in the past but has healed now.
Green.
Okay, well done. Finally, we're going to play the rapid fire round with yourself. You ready for the rapid fire, yeah?
There's another game.
Yeah. Last one.
All right, this one.
Okay. So, what is one myth about marriage counselling that you would like to debunk?
That counselors take the women's side.
What's the best age to get married?
The sooner the better, but it's to do with your maturity.
What percentage of British Muslims looking for marriage are serious about marriage?
But what I would say is based on anecdotal evidence, I would say those who are on serious websites and in serious network places, they are serious to get married. And that's a small percentage.
Okay. How long should one get to know a potential before making the decision to marry them?
You will know to marry someone after 2 or 3 meetings.
What method is the most effective to find a spouse? Apps, marriage events, matchmakers, matrimonial websites, marriage bureaus?
I would say networking through the community.
What is one thing that marriage counselling cannot fix?
It cannot make you love the person. What I mean by that, actually, let me qualify that a little bit. One of the things I do when I do my counseling is I ask couples, do you want to make it work? If one says no, that's when I can't help anymore.
Is love enough to sustain a marriage?
No, not necessarily. I was just going to mention from an Islamic point of view, love is a byproduct. And so when two people get together and they serve one another, it's not one way, they serve one another, they take care of one another, they are there for one another. As a result of that, love actually grows.
Okay. Actually, one last thing. If people want to get hold of you, people perhaps maybe watching this or listening to this and, want to be a part of your services and whatnot, how do they get hold of you?
They can email me, info@themarriageclinic.co.uk, or they can find me on TikTok, Advice with Mizan. I'm more on TikTok than Instagram. I do have an Instagram page, also called Advice with Mizan, but I'm more active on TikTok. So either one of those two.
Okay, I'm hoping that the brothers and sisters who need these kind of services are taking note of that. Anyway, Jazakumullah khair, and inshallah we will speak to you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. If you want to be a guest on this podcast, or if you want to contact us, then please email us. Our email address is divorcedmuslims@gmail.com.
وفي الآفاق